The war was not declared with weapons, but with silence. One morning, the sky turned gold over the colony of Vallis Prime, and every structure built by the ancient alien architects stopped responding. No doors opened, no lights worked, no rooms accepted entry. The living buildings grown from bio-organic roots and shaped with thought sealed themselves against all life forms without warning. Scientists from a dozen species tried to speak to the structures. They sang songs of peace. They brought gifts. They used mind interfaces built by the architects themselves. Still, the buildings stayed cold and unmoving. Entire cities turned into lifeless statues. Panic spread like fire in dry grass. Entire worlds were shut out from their own homes, and chaos followed soon after. At the edge of this strange lockdown was a small research base led by alien architects, including a young female named Alari. She was brilliant, calm, and green-skinned like the vines she worked with. Her whole life had been dedicated to shaping living structures. But now even her voice, her tools, and her bond with the buildings were useless. She sat in front of one sealed garden dome, her hand pressed against it, whispering soft words. Nothing happened. The buildings had a soul, or at least that was the belief. They responded to harmony, intelligence, and empathy. But if that was true, then why had they turned away from the very species who gave them life? Ilari's people believed the structures were angry, grieving, or worse, afraid. But of what? No one knew. A message was sent across the galaxy, requesting assistance from species never invited before. Among those who answered was a human man named Jack Wren. He was no scientist. He was a survivalist, a wanderer, and someone who fixed things with instinct, not knowledge. No one expected much from him. He came with a toolkit and a smile. He walked through the garden dome's outer corridor, past guards who rolled their eyes. Alari met Jack with suspicion. She watched his every move, noting how he touched nothing and simply observed. He didn't speak much, but when he did, it was gentle, almost curious. On the second day, without asking, he approached the sealed dome. He placed his hand against it, just like she had. Nothing changed for a moment. Then, a pulse ran through the wall like a heartbeat. The flowers inside the dome began to stir. Slowly, buds opened. Colors returned to the vines. Light filtered through the roof, brighter than before. The sealed door unlatched with a soft hum. Alari gasped. For the first time in weeks, the living structure had responded. Not to her, not to any architect, but to the touch of this human. Jack stepped back, eyes wide but calm. He didn't understand what had happened. He only said one thing, that the structure felt warm. The architects gathered quickly, demanding tests and scans, but Alari stopped them. She stared at Jack like he was a puzzle the universe had forgotten to solve. Then she asked him to do it again. He walked to another structure, this one older and more ancient. Its skin was layered like bark, thick and coiled. He pressed both hands against it. After a long pause, a small flower bloomed from its surface. Then another. The doors opened without a single sound. Alari fell to her knees, whispering in her own language. The war they feared was changing shape. No one had ever seen a living structure respond this way. It was beyond logic, beyond science. It was something else entirely, something human. Alari stood up and looked at Jack again, this time not as a stranger, but as the missing key to a locked world. He didn't call himself special. He didn't even believe he had done anything. But the buildings believed. The flowers believed. The ancient cores of stone and vine, buried under centuries of growth, now listened when he breathed near them. And Alari, once a proud architect of her people, now followed quietly behind the man who did not build, did not design, but simply touched and made the impossible bloom. Jack didn't understand why the structures responded to him. He only knew they felt alive beneath his palms. When he touched them, It was like greeting an old friend who had forgotten how to speak. Ilari watched with a quiet focus, standing beside him as if afraid to blink. Even the elder architects who once scoffed at humans now stood in the shadows, speechless. On the third morning, Ilari brought Jack to the oldest structure in the valley, a towering pillar tree called the Heartspire. No being had entered it in over 2 centuries. The last time anyone tried, they were repelled by a burst of heat and force that shattered 6 bones. It was sacred and wild, and Ilari had only visited it in her dreams. Jack approached without hesitation. He reached out slowly, placing his hand on the gnarled bark. The structure vibrated softly under his touch. A line of golden light ran up the spine of the tree. The bark peeled open in a spiral, revealing an interior made of flowing light and plant fiber bridges. A warm wind blew outward, filled with the scent of forgotten flowers. The architects panicked. Some shouted for him to step back. Others dropped their tools and ran messages to higher command. But Ilari stepped forward. She entered the Heartspire behind Jack, her bare feet brushing the mossy floor. Her fingers trembled as she touched the living walls that had rejected her since birth. For the first time, they welcomed her presence. Inside, the two found carvings along the inner walls. The shapes moved slowly, telling stories in motion. One scene showed beings reaching for the stars. Another showed them falling. And at the very center was a carving of a figure unlike the others, broad-shouldered, with 5 fingers and eyes like Earth's sun. Ilari stared at it in disbelief. It looked human. Jack said nothing, but he tilted his head slightly. He didn't claim it. He didn't explain it. He only stared like the memory was not his, but still somehow familiar. Ilari reached out to touch the carving, but the wall moved away from her fingers. Then Jack lifted her hand and placed it with his. Together, their touch was accepted. A sudden warmth filled the chamber. Lights flickered on like stars waking in the dusk. The floor shifted, growing seats made of woven vines and glass petals. A low hum echoed around them like the beating of a heart. The Heartspire was alive again, and it had chosen to trust. News of the event spread across colonies faster than light. The human was no longer a visitor. He was now the only link between the architects and their creations. Delegates from distant systems came to witness it. Some tried to mimic him, to touch and speak the way he did. But nothing worked. Only Jack's presence opened doors. The Galactic Council demanded he be studied, scanned, tested. Some suggested cloning his biology. Others wanted to restrict his movement. But Ilari stood in front of him during every meeting. She reminded them that the structures chose him, not the other way around. And that meant something greater than science. More structures began to open, ones buried deep under oceans, ones hidden in frozen canyons. Each one only responded when Jack was near. But there was a pattern. He had to be calm. He had to be honest. If he lied or acted out of fear, the structures would retreat again. It was like they could feel his truth. Jack began to change as well. He spoke more often. He asked questions about Ilari's culture, their songs, and how the living cities were born. He didn't just fix things, he listened, he learned. And in doing so, the structures bloomed brighter and faster. It wasn't magic, it was connection. Ilari started recording everything. Not just for science, but for memory. She believed something ancient had awakened, something tied to the humans that even they had forgotten. The structures were not just buildings, they were guardians. And now, through Jack, they were finally speaking again. But not everyone was pleased. In the dark corners of the Alliance, certain powers feared what this human awakening meant. If living structures rejected every species but one, then balance would be broken. Whispers of sabotage and silence began to creep into the halls of command, and far from the colonies, a massive sealed city stirred beneath layers of stone and time. No one had entered it in 1,000 years. But deep inside, something opened its eyes for the first time and waited for Jack to come. Ilari and Jack were summoned to the central city of Illithan Kor, the capital of the ancient architect world. Unlike the other cities they had visited, this one had never truly closed. It stayed half awake, barely breathing, its outer walls still glowing faintly with memory. The structures there had not welcomed or rejected anyone. They simply waited in silence. The council chamber was held inside a massive lotus-shaped tower. Living walls shifted gently like lungs. Alien delegates filled the hall, whispering in dozens of languages. Jack stood at the center beside Ilari, surrounded by those who once ignored his kind. Now their eyes followed his every move. An elder named Virith spoke first. His voice was soft but sharp. He questioned how a human with no architectural bond, no sacred training, no mind link, could awaken the ancient cities. He suggested it was dangerous. He feared that the structures had been corrupted. Jack listened without interruption. When asked to demonstrate again, Jack was taken to the oldest unentered vault in Illithan Kor. It was shaped like a giant seed, black as night and humming with stored energy. No one had ever opened it, not even the elders. Jack approached, paused, then placed both hands on the surface. The seed pulsed once, then unfolded like petals in bloom. Inside was a space filled with floating orbs of memory. They glowed with stories from forgotten times. The orbs hovered around Jack, spinning gently, revealing images no one had ever seen. In one orb, a human-like figure walked with the ancient architects. In another, it showed two hands, one green, one tan, building a structure together. Gasps filled the air. Even Virith stepped back. The vault had responded not only to Jack's touch, but to his presence alone. Ilari's eyes burned with emotion. It was proof, not of accident, but of connection. Humanity was not an outsider to the architect's legacy. It had always been part of it, but as the orbs floated, one turned red. A different memory played. It showed cities burning, beings fleeing, and a voice, old and pained, repeating a single warning: when unity fails, the structure shall sleep. The vault dimmed, and the petals closed again. The room fell silent. That memory shook the council. They dismissed Jack and Ilari to a resting chamber while they argued behind sealed doors. Some believed Jack was a solution. Others believed he was a threat. Ilari stood beside him on a balcony of light, overlooking the half-living city, her thoughts heavy. She confessed that the architects were not only builders. They were guardians of memory, of harmony, of truth. If something had broken that unity long ago, and only a human could fix it now, then maybe the answer was buried in the past. Jack nodded, not fully understanding, but trusting her words. They were awoken late that night by a secret message. A young architect named Saren, nervous and shaking, begged them to follow her. She took them through quiet tunnels beneath the city to a chamber no one had entered in centuries. At its center was a sphere unlike any before. It pulsed faintly and opened as Jack approached. Inside was a single message, recorded by a long-dead architect. She spoke of a hidden city called Varnix, buried beneath the deserts of the Outer Rim. It was the birthplace of the first living structures. But it was lost after a great betrayal between allies. No species had found it again. She ended with a warning. Only one with forgotten blood can enter. Ilari turned to Jack with a steady voice. She believed he could find Varnix. She believed he was not just an outsider, but a descendant of those who had once helped build the world. Jack didn't answer right away. He looked at his hands, then at the structures around him, and finally nodded. With council permission or not, they prepared to leave for Varnix. Saren gave them an ancient key made of woven light and bark, something only a true bonded soul could carry. As they stepped into the transport vessel, the walls of Illithan Kor glowed faintly. like a farewell being whispered through stone. And in the deepest chamber of the council tower, Virith stood alone, his hand pressed against a hidden wall. It opened slightly, revealing a shadowed room where another memory orb waited. He did not call the guards. He did not alert the others. He simply entered and sealed the door behind him. Something inside him had changed. Perhaps fear. Perhaps wonder. But one truth remained in his heart now. What they thought was lost had returned in the form of a man who didn't belong, yet was meant to be here. And the structures, watching from every root and wall, had already chosen their side. Asterisk, the desert. World of Varnix was a forgotten scar in the galaxy. Satellites once orbited its skies, but now only dust and memory swirled through the air. When Jack and Ilari arrived, they stepped into a landscape where nothing grew and silence ruled every corner. Their vessel landed between two jagged rock spires that looked like broken teeth buried in sand. Ilari activated the ancient map given by Saren. The key pulsed in her palm, casting threads of glowing light that pointed toward a canyon swallowed by shifting dunes. Jack carried supplies, his steps firm as the wind tried to push him back. The heat pressed against them like an invisible wall, but they kept moving. The canyon led them to a cave, its entrance shaped like a spiral shell. The walls inside were carved with symbols long faded by time. Jack's hand brushed one, and it glowed softly, responding like a sigh of recognition. Deeper, in the cave, they found what Ilari called a seed chamber, an underground vault that pulsed with faint life. Inside the chamber were stone-like pods, each covered in moss and vine. Fossils. None of them responded to Ilari's voice. She placed her palm on each one, speaking softly in her native tongue, but the chamber remained cold. Jack stepped forward without speaking. He knelt by one pod and rested his hand on its surface. The response was instant, the vines untangled. The pod opened with a gentle exhale of warm air. Inside was not a body, but a living structure core, a glowing heart-shaped crystal surrounded by green threads. It floated upward and hovered in front of Jack, turning slowly, as if waiting for a command. Ilari fell to her knees, stunned. Core began to spin faster. Vines shot out from the walls, weaving into patterns around the chamber. A pulse spread across the floor and into the walls. Then the entire canyon above shifted. The rocks cracked. The sands moved. Slowly, a staircase of light and stone unfolded upward toward the surface. They climbed together in silence. At the top of the path stood the lost city of Varnix. It wasn't built. It had grown. Towers shaped like petals. Halls that swayed like trees. Everything was made of living matter, untouched by war or decay. As Jack stepped forward, the city breathed for the first time in 1,000 years. Structures bloomed open, doors unfurled, pathways lit beneath his feet. Ilari's eyes filled with tears as she whispered the names of buildings long thought destroyed. She touched one wall and it let her in. The city had not rejected her, but it had waited for the one who could awaken it. They found a central dome filled with memory threads. These glowing vines danced in the air, forming shapes and images. They showed ancient humans and architects working together. They showed joy. They showed betrayal. They showed a final moment where a human protected the last living structure. From destruction before everything went dark, the betrayal had come not from humans, but from another species that tried to weaponize the living structures. The architects shut everything down to prevent more bloodshed. But the cost was unity. The connection between species was broken. Varnix had been hidden to protect the truth. Jack reached toward the memory threads. As his fingers touched them, they wrapped gently around his wrist. A spark passed through his body. He gasped. Visions flooded his mind. He saw the first architects. He saw them laugh. He saw his own face among them, not his exact face, but close enough to question everything. Ilari pulled him back gently. She saw the fear in his eyes, but she also saw strength. Jack was more than human. He was part of something that never should have been forgotten. And now, through him, that legacy had a voice again. They spent the night in one of the blooming halls. The city kept them warm. It adjusted to their needs without command. Alari played a soft melody on her native flute, and the walls echoed it back like a lullaby. Jack sat beside her, silent, thoughtful, his hands still glowing faintly, but far away, in the shadows of another world. Those who feared the rise of Varnix were already watching. The awakening of the city was felt across ancient structures galaxy-wide. Some trembled, some lit up, and others, long corrupted, began to stir with something darker. And in the council chamber of Illithan Kor, Elder Virith opened a hidden archive. With trembling hands, inside was a forbidden device, an ancient key once used to control the structures. As he stared at it, he whispered a name lost to time, and the device answered. By the next sunrise, Varnix had come fully alive. It was no longer a forgotten place. Light flowed through the veins of its living towers. Songs hummed through the roots beneath the stone. As Jack and Alari walked through its blooming corridors, the city adjusted to every step they took. It responded not only with sound or movement, but with emotion. Alari believed the city was trying to speak to them. Not in words, but through patterns, through echoes, through memory. She spent hours watching the vines move, recording their shapes, translating the pulses. Jack didn't understand it all, but his instincts guided him. Whenever he touched something, the city calmed, as if it recognized his presence. They discovered a hidden structure deep beneath the city, sealed with petals of obsidian glass. When Jack placed his hand on it, the petals opened. Inside was a chamber filled with crystalline seeds. These were the firstborn of the living structures, the source of all others. They shimmered in perfect silence, untouched by time or decay. One of the seeds pulsed and floated toward Jack. It hovered near his chest, then gently pressed into his palm. The moment it touched him, his body lit with a golden glow. The seed disappeared into his skin, absorbed without pain. Jack fell to one knee, dizzy, overwhelmed by images rushing through his mind. He saw the first bond. A human and an architect, their hands together, over soil that glowed. He saw structures being sung into existence. He saw betrayal, battles, and the final sealing of Varnix. But he also saw a promise left behind, hidden within the cores of the seeds, that one day, one of human blood would return to make things whole. Alari helped him up. She had tears in her eyes, but also a strength that hadn't been there before. She now believed without doubt that Jack was not just chosen by chance. He was part of the city's origin. His bloodline, forgotten by history, was the thread that connected all of it. Meanwhile, far away, Elder Virith stood inside the Forbidden's chamber. He activated the ancient device hidden for centuries. The key spun with red light and sent signals across the network of sleeping structures. But something went wrong. The device responded with resistance. It pulsed, rejecting him, causing pain to ripple through his arm. Virith gritted his teeth. He believed Jack had triggered something dangerous, that the living cities would fall under one species if not stopped, so he changed his plan. He sent a silent command to an ancient hunter drone system buried beneath a former war zone. Its purpose was simple: contain or eliminate the unpredictable. The drone core, buried in steel ruins, awoke. It shook dust from its limbs and stretched its mechanical spine. Its programming linked directly to the old architect codes. And though most of the cities had rejected control, this machine still obeyed. It took flight in the direction of Varnix. Back in the blooming city, Alari and Jack stood inside the heart chamber. The structures formed a map in front of them, a moving projection of other living cities. One by one, the cities lit up in response to Varnix. Even those lost to war and silence now glowed faintly. The awakening had begun, but Jack noticed something wrong. A small red dot appeared on the map, moving fast. Ilari recognized the signal. It was an automated hunter drone. It was designed to disable biological links and force shut any living structure it entered. If it reached Varnix, it could collapse the entire network. They had little time. Ilari activated the root defense systems of the city. Vines thickened. Barriers began to grow. Jack ran to the outer edge of the city, trying to connect with the structures there. He placed his hands on the walls, trying to spread calm through their network. He felt them respond with urgency. The drone arrived with a scream of metal and fire. It descended like a falling star, landing in a blast of heat. Its legs pierced the stone. Its scanners locked onto Jack instantly. Ilari screamed his name as the drone fired a pulse meant to sever his bond with the structures, but the city reacted faster. Vines surged upward, blocking the blast. The ground shifted, forming shields of crystal and light. The drone screamed again, firing wildly. Jack moved toward it slowly, not with anger, but focus. He placed his hand on the earth and whispered the word he saw in the memory threads, and the city roared back. Asterisk, the roar of the city was not sound, but a wave of force. Energy poured from the roots beneath the ground, rising into walls of glowing vines and stone. The hunter drone tried to recalibrate, its mechanical limbs twitching as it attempted another pulse attack. But the living city had fully awakened, and now it fought back with purpose. The walls around Jack shimmered with light. The seed within his body pulsed in rhythm with the city. Varnix responded to his heartbeat, to his focus, to his will. Jack stood firm, placing both hands on the ground. Beneath his feet, the soil glowed gold and green. The roots of the city stretched out like fingers, wrapping around the legs of the drone. Ilari ran to his side, holding a small orb of pure architect energy. It was meant to amplify thought commands. Jack nodded and pressed his hand against it. The orb responded instantly. The structures around them grew taller, stronger, and faster. The drone tried to break free, slicing at the roots with heated blades. But every cut was sealed by new growth. The drone changed tactics. It fired a charged core meant to disrupt neural fields. The pulse hit Jack in the chest and sent him flying backward. He hit the ground hard, gasping. Ilari screamed and rushed to him. But before the drone could strike again, something happened. The ground opened beneath it. Massive tendrils of light and vine dragged the drone down into the earth. The hunter screeched as it was swallowed. The vine sealed the hole behind it. For a moment, silence returned. Jack sat up slowly, pain in his ribs, but alive. Ilari hugged him tightly, then pulled back, staring at the mark glowing on his chest. The seed inside him had activated fully. He was now bonded with Varnix in a way even the architects had never achieved. From deep below, a new structure rose. It was a spire made of crystal and memory threads. The top opened like a flower. Inside was a glowing sphere, pulsing with ancient energy. Ilari called it the core of harmony. It was believed lost forever. Now it returned, drawn by Jack's connection. The sphere floated into the air, then descended slowly toward Jack. It hovered above his hands, and then gently pressed into his palms. A warmth spread through him. He heard no words, but he understood. The core accepted him as guardian, not owner. As bridge, not ruler. And that was enough. Ilari stood beside him, her eyes wide with wonder. Around them, the city shimmered with new life. Trees that had never bloomed now stretched toward the sky. Structures once sealed opened their hearts. The network of cities across the stars felt the change. Light traveled between worlds faster than sound, and cities everywhere began to breathe again. But not all reactions were peaceful. In the outer colonies, corrupted fragments of the old system twisted in confusion. Some began to reject their purpose. Others tried to isolate themselves. A few, broken beyond repair, crumbled. The awakening was not gentle everywhere. Jack and Ilari knew they had only begun a greater journey. They returned to Illithan Core, arriving in a vessel grown by Varnix. Itself. It had no engines. It moved with living energy, folding space as it flew. When it landed on the council platform, every elder stood waiting. This time, even Virith did not speak first. He stepped aside as Jack and Ilari walked forward. Jack said nothing. He held out the Harmony Core, glowing bright in his hands. The council dropped to one knee, not in submission, but in recognition. They saw now what they had ignored. The connection between species, forgotten and buried by fear, had been restored through this simplest act. Trust. Ilari addressed them. She spoke of what they saw, what they learned, and what was still to come. She told them that Varnix had not chosen Jack to rule, but to remind them of what unity once was, what it still could be. She ended her words with a vow that echoed through every stone. We will never let this bond be broken again. Jack looked up at the ancient structure surrounding them. It no longer felt foreign. It felt alive. And it felt like home. For the first time in centuries, the architects and their cities worked as one. Living structures across star systems reawakened. Their lights shimmered across mountains, oceans, and deserts. Beings of every species watched in awe as cities began to sing again. Jack became a symbol, not of power, but of harmony. Ilari remained by his side. Her name, once only known in the lower design guilds, now echoed in the highest halls. She refused titles. She only asked to continue learning. The connection she and Jack shared grew stronger with each structure they visited. The cities not only opened, they remembered. Varnix now pulsed at the center of the new awakening. It sent out living vessels grown from crystal and root, carrying messages of peace and rebuilding. These vessels arrived in distant colonies where people thought the architect cities were myths. When Jack stepped out of one ship, ancient doors opened as if they had waited only for him. One such colony was Iscaranine, a world wrapped in thick clouds and rivers of silver fog. The living structures there had gone silent for over 500 years. No sound, no light, no growth. When Jack placed his hand on the central stone of the city, the clouds split open. The vines unfurled, and a tower of golden leaves grew skyward. Ilari watched it happen with quiet joy. The people of Iscaranine wept openly. Some dropped to their knees. Others touched the growing walls and whispered thanks. Jack smiled but remained humble. He said nothing had changed. He only reminded the city that it was never alone. Yet even as peace spread, warnings began to arrive. Not all structures had reawakened with kindness. In several lost zones, the growth returned twisted. Black vines, flickering lights, screams buried in stone. These were places corrupted before the slumber. They did not welcome the light. They feared it. Jack and Ilari were called to investigate one such place. The city was named Durnus. Once a great center of art and healing, now it stood hollow. Its towers sagged. Its roots grew backwards into themselves. When Jack approached, the structure shivered. Ilari felt it too. Something was wrong here. Inside Durnus they found memories trapped in walls. Painful ones. Memories of betrayal and forced control. A time when certain species tried to override the living cities to create weapons. The scars had never healed. The structures of Durnus saw Jack not as hope, but as a threat. He tried to connect gently. He sang the harmony signal Ilari had taught him. But the city screamed back in a storm of dark roots and shattered crystal. It saw his light as poison. It saw his seed mark as danger. Varnix's awakening had frightened the places still held by grief. Ilari pulled him back just in time. The city slammed shut behind them. The path they had walked grew thorns. Jack sat on a stone outside the gates, silent. He had never failed before, but now he saw something deeper. Not every wound could be healed by touch alone, they returned. To Varnix with heavy hearts, Jack met with the council again. He explained what he saw. Alari stood beside him and offered a solution. Not to force healing, but to honor pain. To remember why some cities remain silent. And to wait until they were ready to speak again, the council agreed. They declared a period of reflection. No city would be approached without first understanding its memory. Jack was not a key to be inserted everywhere. He was a reminder that true unity required patience. Trust could not be demanded. It had to be offered and earned. In private, Jack and Alari sat beneath the oldest tree in Varnix. Its branches stretched across the city. Glowing fruits hung from its limbs. Jack asked if he had done enough. Alari placed her hand on his and said the cities would answer in time. The fact they spoke at all again was already a miracle, and above them, in the heart of Varnix's sky, a new light flickered. A pulse from a place even the architects had forgotten. A city not marked on any map, a structure older than memory itself. It had remained silent since the beginning. But now, it whispered. A name neither of them knew, Asterisk. The pulse that reached Varnix did not follow any known path. It came through the deep roots of the oldest structures, bypassing the usual harmony signals. The city stirred with a quiet tremble as if listening to a voice it hadn't heard since time began. Alari and Jack stood beneath the central spire, watching the light ripple across the sky. The name whispered from the unknown city was not a word. It was a feeling, a call. Jack felt it in his chest, in the same place where the seed once entered him. The harmony core pulsed in sync with the signal. Alari placed her hand on his heart and confirmed it. The forgotten city was reaching out. To him, the council gathered within hours. No one could find the location of the city using maps, data, or energy traces. It did not exist in current records, but Jack knew where to go. He couldn't explain how. He just pointed to a spot in the starfield far beyond the edge of the known colonies. Alari didn't question it. They departed in silence. A vessel grown by Varnix carried them into the void. Days passed in stillness. No comes, no star routes. Just instinct and the bond between human and structure guiding them forward. Eventually, a shadow appeared against a distant blue giant. A city hidden in orbit, buried beneath a moon's crust. It was massive, older than Varnix. Its walls were darker, made of stone and metal fused together. The surface had no entrances. No lights, no sound. But when Jack stepped out of the ship and approached it, a doorway appeared. It unfolded like a single breath, revealing a corridor lined with sleeping vines and faded memories. Inside, they found something no one expected. Not a living structure, but a tomb. Hundreds of cores, cracked and dim. Walls filled with ancient carvings. Jack walked slowly, fingers brushing the stories etched into stone. They spoke of the first builders. Of a time when humans and architects shared not just knowledge, but blood. This city had been the first to fall. Not to war, but to fear. When betrayal spread among the stars, the builders here chose to seal themselves away rather than fight. They believed unity had failed. They believed silence was the only way to preserve what was left. Until now, the harmony core in Jack's hand began to glow. Faint at first, then brighter. One by one, the cracked cores around the chamber began to flicker. A soft hum passed through the air. The roots along the walls twitched, testing the space around them. And then, a voice filled the air, not spoken, but felt. You have returned. Not to claim, but to understand. Alari fell to her knees, tears in her eyes. Jack simply nodded. He did not speak. He let the structures remember. He let them decide. Slowly, vines crept from the walls, wrapping gently around his arms. They did not bind him. They embraced him. A connection long broken had begun to mend. The City did not rise or bloom like the others. It pulsed with deep, steady rhythm. It chose not to shine but to root. It would not become a beacon. It would become a foundation. A hidden heart of the network. A reminder that not all pain needs to be healed with light. Some must simply be remembered. When they returned to Varnix, the council waited with questions. Jack offered no grand speeches. Ilari stood beside him and explained what they found. The lost city would not awaken for glory. It would remain hidden, but its silence had turned into listening. Its pain had turned into presence. The cities of the architects had finally reached peace. Some bloomed, some whispered, some simply stood. Still content to exist once more, the galaxy shifted. Where there was fear, there was now connection. Where there was silence, there was song. And where there was once a void, a human had planted hope. Jack chose to remain among the structures. He became a guardian, not of power, but of balance. Ilari stayed with him. Together, they continued walking the living paths, not to fix the cities, but to walk beside them. Not to lead, but to listen, and across the stars, wherever a seed stirred. In stone, wherever a root reached out for light, a single name lived in the pulse of every bloom: human.